right, next up, I see Harrison is on. Okay, great. Hi, Harrison. Harrison was a postdoc with us. He has moved on. He is now a scientist two at Novo Nordisk. He completed his PhD at Oregon State University in exercise physiology and skeletal muscle lipid metabolism. He then took a postdoc position. He was awarded an F32 fellowship. Before transitioning to industry. Since joining Novo Nordisk, he's been involved in many different aspects of research and early development. His experience ranges from providing intellectual and technical support for more developed projects, proposing new drug target ideas, initiating new collaborations with academia or biotech groups, and assisting in the diligence of various internal opportunities. Contact info here if you want to look Harrison up. And with that, let me stop sharing. And
can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay.
You want to share
my screen? Yeah. Okay, share. And bear with me 1 minute.
Yep.
We use Teams, and I never use Zoom anymore, and it's kind of in my way. Hold on. Wouldn't be a virtual meeting without somebody having some sort of difficulty. Let me just do this. Okay. There we go. Okay.
Awesome.
Are you seeing the presentation view?
Yes, we've got you.
Okay.
All right. I'll let you take it away.
Yeah.
I'll be monitoring the chat. So if there are things that come up, I'll let you know.
Perfect. And I was going to go ahead and say that, if at any point questions come up during the presentation, I hope this is very informal. Please feel free to raise a hand, and Becca can make me pause or put something in the chat, because I'm more than happy to stop as we go if a question comes up. That way, potentially you don't forget it later, or we can always just answer questions and discuss at the end. There should be plenty of time for discussion at the end. But then again, if you're not comfortable asking a question or would like to email me directly or contact me directly to talk up further after, then that's also an option. So with that, I want to thank Becca for the nice introduction, and thank her for the opportunity to speak today. And I'm really excited to, be a part of a panel that gets to speak to experience from academia and from industry, particularly because this isn't something that I had many opportunities to be involved in when I was in my graduate degree and or my postdoc. I think there was maybe like one where I got to get some sort of information from an industry professional, but I very much think that the more information and knowledge that we can be prepared with, then the better we can kind of direct ourselves to what we think could be a good path, because there's pros and cons of both. I mean, both have fantastic career trajectories and could be really enriching careers, but some are better for one person or different one personality versus the other. So it's just finding out what may work best for you, and each of course present many challenges. Today, I'm going to be talking about my industry experience since I joined Novo Nordisk. I've been here for about 2 years, and there's a whole host of things that have happened since I've been here, and some things are fantastic, and some things can be disruptive, and some things can be extremely challenging. And so I'll be talking about my experience, and then really just how things can change rapidly in industry. And so, like Becca said, I'm a research scientist. I work in kind of the disease umbrella that focuses on obesity, type 2 diabetes, and MASH. And specifically, I'm in the neurobiology department. And so just a high level agenda, or for what I'm going to be talking about today, I'll give a really brief background into myself, a little bit more in depth, just because there's some tidbits in my career trajectory, because it's not, I guess, the exactly typical. I tried a different path first, but just to speak to the idea that, I mean, every single experience can be a learning experience. It can give you key experience that can be really valuable for any job setting. And so just to kind of speak to the idea that everyone has more skills than you think, and you should really try to speak to those because they can be valuable when for people who are looking for somebody. And so I'll talk about my interview timeline and what that process was like, because it was kind of a shock to me when I went through it, and I'll talk about that more later. I'll talk about different areas within research and early development because I'm only in one small piece of it and it's a very large umbrella, just to give you an idea of the different kinds of like departments or flavors of stuff that happens within research and early development. And I won't even speak to the vast amount of things that can happen outside of research because there's many industry positions that are not necessarily within research. I'll speak more specifically about my role and what I do in research and early development. And I'm happy to answer any questions on that. What it's like to work in a global company, and the really enriching environment that can be, and also some of the challenges that it can present. And again, as I mentioned, I'll talk about how things can change very, very quickly, and I'll talk about some key takeaways that I feel are relevant, from my own perspective, and then just kind of retrospection on the last couple of years. Would I still go the path that I went to get to where I am today? And so again, so my background is really just kind of broad within exercise physiology. I've done some stuff in vitro, in vivo, and in the clinical setting, and all of my research kind of focused on obesity, and it started out in skeletal muscle metabolism. My postdoc worked in the liver and a little bit in the brain. And then since joining Novo Nordisk, I've focused a little bit in adipose. And because I have kind of a diverse background in various different tissues, I've provided support for a lot of various projects. We either technical or intellectual support. And specifically, what's kind of helped me move around, something that I identified that can make me versatile is I have a specialty in mitochondrial energetics, which is kind of like a synonymous language that you can use to at least have some sort of foot into a new tissue or a new disease, because the mitochondria is involved in a lot of scenarios, of course. And so my background actually started out in sport performance. I was a strength conditioning coach, and I'm not going to talk much about that, but I started off in that and decided I wanted to work with a bigger population and maybe have more of an impact than like the less than 1% of people who are in high level athletics. And so I ended up wanting to work in various chronic diseases and try to understand the physiology of that better, so we may eventually identify some sort of therapeutic intervention to prevent that or improve that state. And the thing that got me from my sport performance world to research, because I had zero lab experience, and I had put my hat out there for a couple of different positions, and the one I ended up getting, I didn't fit the job description exactly, but even if you don't fit the job description exactly, you don't know exactly what they're looking for. It might not really be described or represented in the job description, so to speak. And so the reason I ended up getting into that position is because I had a lot of human experience, and they needed somebody to lead a small human clinical trial, and they're willing to take somebody who was excited and wanted to learn a lot and teach them lab-based skills if you had some of the human-based experience. And then going through to my postdoc, using some of what I learned from my PhD position to get my foot into the postdoc position, and having some synonymous expertise. That one was with the mitochondria. And then getting into industry, again, it was a position that the job description didn't really exactly fit what my background was. But I mean, everyone that's on this call or in the room will have, training that makes it so you are able to troubleshoot problems, design an experiment, or figure things out quickly. And those are extremely valuable. And so, you know, recognizing that and saying in a job description, maybe I don't even know maybe I don't know exactly how to do this method, but if you look into the method, you can find commonalities between other methods you've done. If it's like a lab-based position, then you can speak to those and say that with this, I think I would be confident that I can quickly learn this and apply it as needed. Because any position you apply to, or there's going to be training regardless, and they're looking for a good fit and someone who has the base characteristics in terms of knowledge and those things, but there's always going to need to be training. And so if you really show excitement and trainability, then that can be something that can go a long way. So my personal hiring timeline, I like to talk about this because it was an eye-opener for me, because I was really just kind of putting my foot out there and just kind of seeing like, hey, let's just talk to some people, see what happens. And so in 2021, in mid-October, I just had an exploratory phone call with a network connection. It was a colleague of my PhD advisor who had ended up at Novo Nordisk, and he was really almost the only industry connection that I had. And I just wanted to have a conversation with him and see what it's like and the types of things that he does, and what it's like working for a big pharma company and a global company and those kinds of things. And it's not even somebody that I knew very well. I just had the one connection of a connection, basically. And so I just had a phone call with him just to learn about it. And in that phone call, he kind of talked about the types of things they do there. And then I talked about what my focus is, the things that I would like to do, where the direction I want to go. And he just kind of brought up that, hey, there's some positions that are open right now. And, I don't know if it would be a good fit. I don't know if what you're looking for, but why don't you put in an application and see what happens? And so with some of his help, because he was very gracious in helping me, I submitted an application a week or two later, and that was just kind of really tampering down a lot of what I had in my academic CV, to be very pointed. And again, I was just kind of applying in the sense that there's probably not really any chance this will happen. Like, I don't really feel like I'm a good, the job description is really what they're looking for in my skill set. And when I talked to him, he had said it took him quite some time to get the initial call back. But then once he started moving, when he was applying for positions, things started to move pretty quickly. And a week later, I had a call with a global recruiter, or like a US based recruiter. And it was just a very quick screen phone call and then a questionnaire that I had to fill out. And this is kind of where I alluded to earlier, where I looked up some of the skill sets that they were looking for. And I was very blunt and honest in the sense that I don't have specific experience with this technique, but these techniques I've done, and I think they would directly apply to that. And I think it would not be a problem for me to pick that up.
Harrison?
Yeah.
Harrison, can I ask, when you say you looked up different skills and techniques, is that just in the job ad, like flyer, or were there other places that you went to?
Yeah, so it was talking about, and I can't remember exactly what it was at this point now, but it was talking about a specific assay and types of techniques that they were recruiting for this position, at least when it was posted. And so I just Googled and like kind of looked up what that technique is, looked up protocols, what does it entail, and then just looked at what I've done in my past, and found a lot of commonalities in the techniques that I've done personally, and spoke directly to that protocol and how what I've done is applicable to that type of assay or lab-based technique. So it was in the job description, and then I just kind of looked up via the internet what that assay or technique entailed. And so, so I submitted that questionnaire, and then a few days later, so I think this was the week after my application was submitted, and I think I got in a little bit late. So things might have moved a little bit faster for me rather than like maybe I applied really early when the job was opened. Um, but then I got a call from a regional recruiter that was more localized to the area. This position was in Seattle, and had a conversation with them, and then they set up some of the follow up interviews. And so the next thing that happened is I spoke to the hiring manager for about 30 minutes, and that was kind of informal and just in the sense that he was kind of presenting the job a little bit more to me, and the department and the goals of that department and what they do at the Seattle site. And then I spoke to my background and how I got where I am now and what I would like to do in the future. He also asked me questions like, why would you want to work for this company? And so, of course, doing some background into the company that you're applying for, some of the stuff that they do, just in terms of research. It can even be very high level. So for me, it was a passion to, try to work on something that could be a therapeutic for chronic disease sometime within the next 10 to 15 years, which I feel is for me personally is something that I in academia I felt like I was very very far away just on the very early discovery side. In an industry things get accelerated a lot faster, and so I felt like I could be a part of something that would be maybe something I would see in my lifetime, as a beneficial therapeutic for somebody. And so I spoke with him, and then he kind of gave me the rundown of what the official interview process would be, where I had interviews with the whole team throughout an entire day. I had meetings with HR. I had another meeting with him, and it was just very, very wide, broad based, where they would ask me, how would you characterize, if you say you have a bunch of targets, how would you characterize via like what assays, which targets might be the best move forward for an obesity target or things like that. And then some were and I hate these, just like thought experiments, like the not like the tongue twisters, but like just like if you're looking at a picture that is your brother's brother and so happens. I'm terrible at those, especially under pressure. But this person was a very eclectic individual, and he also asked me if I saw a computer smoking, what should I do? Should I throw water on it, or should I turn it off, or things like that? So it can be very diverse in the types of things you do. I gave a short presentation to the group, and they asked me questions about my research. And yeah, it was a very long day, but it was a very fun and enriching interview process, which was great for me because it got me excited about this potential job. Um, and then after that, I thought I was done with all the interviews, and I was pretty excited. I felt like they went really well. And then I had one more interview, which was with the hiring manager, or sorry, the boss of the hiring manager, or like what's called the vice president of the disease area at the time. And shortly after a discussion with her, I received an offer. And so my thought process is I thought that there would be an on-site interview, so I was still kind of very like, oh, things are going. I hadn't really talked to very many people about it yet, because I still was thinking there was probably not a very good chance that I would get this, because I assumed there would be other people, better fit for the job description that might have the specific experience. And yeah, and then an offer was extended, and I was just kind of like, holy crap. So within the span of probably about 3 weeks, I started an interview and I had a job offer. And I say holy crap and show this short timeline just in the sense of, it can take time to get your foot in the door and maybe go through the interview process, but can also happen really fast. So if this is something that you want to communicate with members of your lab, your advisor, or anything, if you're comfortable doing that and you want to, get their input or anything like that, it's probably good to do it earlier than later because in my case it, it, I just ended up with a job offer when I thought it still had time before that was going to happen. And it was also still kind of in the the realm of COVID, and they were still virtual, like kind of only people, lab-based people were on site. So there's a little bit of a caveat that they weren't even going to do an on-site interview, and I just didn't realize that. And so I got my offer right before Thanksgiving, and then after Thanksgiving, I accepted my offer, and then it went into some negotiation phases of not necessarily me trying to negotiate my salary because I didn't feel like I probably could have, but I didn't feel like I was in a position to negotiate because I was fresh out of my postdoc, not far out of my PhD, and applying for this position. And again, I felt like maybe there was other competition, but in hindsight, I think you can always negotiate a little bit, or it never hurts to ask. And what I negotiated actually was the timing a little bit on when I would start, because they wanted me to start January 4th. So that was like a 1 month turnaround for my wife and I, our fiance at the time, to sell our house, do all of those things, and relocate to Seattle. And so I asked for March for a little bit more time, and they came back with the very end of January. So they at least kind of met me in the middle a little bit. And even with that quick turnaround, I will say that the relocation package that they provide made it okay. It made it so it was doable, basically, and the transition was pretty good. But holy smokes, was it a whirlwind of figuring things
Harrison,
out.
you're cutting out a little bit. It's hard to hear you. I don't know why it's
Yeah.
going in and out slightly. Now we
I can
can
see
hear.
it. You can hear me now.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, just I'm not really sure why that's happening. I can also let me do this. Let me put in my headphones, and maybe that'll help.
Okay, perfect.
Just give me one moment. Sorry. Okay. Hang on. Okay, can you hear me? Is
Yes,
this any
we can.
better?
Yep, let's give that a try.
Okay. Okay. And then can you see the screen? It's still on the
Yep, all good.
Okay, cool. Actually, is it moving at all for you? The like transitions changing? No.
No,
Okay.
we're stuck on the initial
Okay.
screen.
Okay. Let me redo this. Share screen. That. That's still not doing anything. All right. 1 second. Escape. And share. Okay, are you seeing it changing now and all that stuff?
We've got it. Thank you.
Okay, yep, no problem. And hopefully this is a little bit better. Just speak up and let me know if it's not. So it happened really, really fast. And what I'm trying to get at is, going into it, even if it might take a long time, just have the understanding that things could move very quickly. So you have to be prepared for that, and you have to be willing to take that leap if it actually happens. Because you can always say no if it's not the right time. It's not the right time. But if you want to take advantage of something that comes up, then be ready for that. And so the key learnings from that were just that industry can move really fast, and it it goes way faster than something like academia, because they're trying to fill a position so they can continue to move projects forward. Um, and utilizing your network can go so far. They if you know someone personally in industry, reach out to them, talk to them, even if it's just a conversation. You just never know what's going to be available, or what might string up into something that could move forward to a potential job. And if you don't, then reach out to folks via LinkedIn, because many of people within industry are more than happy to discuss and meet with folks and provide their experiences. And then lastly, just kind of what I said before, don't sell yourself short. Even if you don't fit the job description exactly, don't be afraid to apply. And an internal referral can go a really long way. To the extent that the position that I applied for, it wasn't exactly the perfect fit for my qualifications, but I had an internal referral kind of vouch for me, and there was another type of position that hadn't been posted yet that I would be a really good fit for. So they kind of pivoted, and that's how I kind of got my foot in the door for that position. And so research and early development, like I said, there's a lot of different areas within this. Let's see. I'm not going to speak too much into them, but this is just to provide some of like the variety just within research. There's things called transformational research units, and those are kind of like smaller satellite companies that were either acquired at some time and so there you've got like the mothership Novo company, and then you've got these TRUs, which are they have a little bit more flexibility, and they can kind of work as a biotech that still has the funding of a large pharma industry. And so there's stem cell based therapies. They're based in Fremont. There's what's called the global nucleic acid therapies, which was formerly known as Dicerna, and that's RNAi and nucleic acid therapies. There's digital science and innovation, so bioinformatics, artificial intelligence, kind of taking big data and distilling it down so we can digest it and try to move forward with targets. The area that I'm in is global drug discovery, and that includes biological drug discovery and validation, proposing new ideas, working to validate them or generate proof of concept data, and then moving it forward. And that can be both internal and external. Global research technologies, which is kind of like chemistry, and they help the crazy ideas that the biologists come up with and try to make them into an actual drug therapy. And then you have global translation, which are the folks who help in the translation of preclinical to clinical by identifying potential biomarkers for these drugs as they develop and the types of studies that need to happen. And then you have the people who kind of manage and guide the strategy in the portfolio, who are usually leadership. And so those are some of the areas just within research and early development. There's so much more within this industry, of course, particularly a large pharma. And so me specifically, I'm considered an in vitro biology specialist, or a scientist too. But specifically, I'm in obesity, and some of the stuff that I do from a biological and technological standpoint, I've identified new targets within the literature, either new or old, or identify new pieces of technology that's out there, and see if it's something that could be beneficial for us to validate targets in a different way of the technology that we have already. So identifying those and determining if they are a good target for a drug, or a good new piece of technology for us to utilize, then getting those and validating them, or generating proof of concept data, things like that, to kind of try and develop and push it forward. And the idea is we were always trying to work towards something that could be a therapeutic for a patient population at some point. And if the idea is we are trying to disprove this biology and see
if it still stands after we do our best to validate it. Because, you know, the idea is if you try to disprove a hypothesis and it still stands, then hopefully that is a pretty good hypothesis and it'll continue to move forward. And if it moves forward, you then can represent targets to governance. There's things called bioinnovation groups that you can present to for various different disease types or different connotations within disease to get support to continue to move it forward. And then it eventually goes to a larger governance where you can get approval to kind of continue to progress it in the drug pipeline and get resources. And for us, resources is in the form of time because that's the only thing that we can't get back, and that's the most precious thing that we have. And so when you get resources, it can be allocate people to this target or project. And then I also, as I mentioned before, I will provide biological and technical expertise for different projects that I might not be driving myself, but could use help from me, or different technologies, or you know, providing data that an external biotech has where they utilize some technology that I am comfortable with, so I can help interpret their data and validate it. And so there's a lot of various things within just biology and technology. As I mentioned, there's also biological and technical expertise that I can provide, and that can be with assay development. And for me, a lot of times it's bioenergetics in the form of oxygen consumption, like the seahorse, or this new technology called the Recipher. And so I provide support in those ways and help design studies, either in vitro or not so much in vivo for me, because we have a specific in vivo pharmacology group that does that. But, you know, providing input in how these studies could be designed so we can best answer the questions. Data analysis and interpretation, and then the focus group is kind of that bioinnovation group that I mentioned, because I'm a core member of one of those, and so I am one of the individuals that helps, you know, provide input to a target, whether it should move forward or whether it shouldn't, or if they need more information or it needs to be focused more, things like that. And then there's project management that can be from the biological standpoint, particularly as it gets progresses, and you have a team of people and you're kind of working with a whole team to determine the best route forward, interpret data, see what could be a path forward for treatment or modality that you could use target this biology. And then working as a collaboration lead, either with academia or biotech, because there's a lot of like grants or postdoc funding or things like that Novo can provide, and a lot of times that takes an internal person to kind of work with an outside group to develop those and kind of push us forward to try and get support for those. And the last is this external diligence. You know, we can do a lot internally, but there's so many different groups out there with different new technologies or novel biology or different methods of analyzing things, and they will come to Novo Nordisk and present their idea, their assets, and we can do internal validation of them to determine whether we want to do a collaboration with them and make sure that we get the same data that they get, because they're marketing themselves, and we want to make sure that it's a good business decision to work with them. And you evaluate those proposals as a team, and then you can negotiate steps forward of what it would take for us to work together, or additional things we would need to see, and things like that. And so that's kind of my role, just on a high level. And the next thing is working and collaborating in a global company. It's so just research and early development. You've got I was in Seattle, and I'll be relocating to Boston, and I'll talk more about that soon, but there will still be some folks in Seattle. The stem cell group is in Fremont. There will be a very large site that's building up in Boston. There's a site in Oxford. The headquarters is in Greater Copenhagen. And then we also have a research unit in Beijing. And so this can be unbelievably enriching in the sense that you have so many different expertises in different areas, and it's a large global organization where you have different cultures, and it's a very diverse working environment. So all those things are really enriching. Sometimes it can be can mean that, let's say, for example, for Boston and Beijing, the time difference is 12 hours. So it basically means that somebody's always going to have a not so fun meeting time. Or Seattle and Copenhagen, basically afternoon for Copenhagen is like 6 in the morning for Seattle. So there's definitely some unique meeting times that you may have working in a global organization. And what comes with that is Novo Nordisk is a Danish company, so there's a European work approach, which is something that I really enjoy, and I know a lot of folks that work at Novo. That's one of the key things that they really like about working for Novo Nordisk, and that just means having a good work-life balance. They encourage you to take your time, and it's what's the last thing I was going to say? It's just a different work environment that I've worked in before, I guess. There's job rotation.
Harrison?
Yep, go ahead.
We had a question in the chat about how you feel about that work-life balance. Maybe you could contrast that with what you experience in academia a little bit, and then a follow-up question about if you're allowed to work remote at all or what that might look like.
Those are great questions. And I think speaking to the work-life balance a little bit, I think coming from a European company, they're very they are very strict about that, in the sense that if you're taking time, you're taking time. That doesn't mean everyone does that. So it can still kind of be dependent on your own personal boundaries, on what you're willing to do. So some people take it very, very seriously, and some people a little less so, but it's a little bit more individualistic in the sense of work-life balance. And there, of course, can be times where there are very strong, tight deadlines. And so there are definitely times where the work can be a little bit more heavy. But there are a lot of great benefits, like unlimited paid time off, where we are encouraged to take it. And it's not like you're penalized for taking it. And when you're off, and people try not to bug you. And there's a lot of good benefits that come with that. So I would say the work-life balance here is great. But it can be difficult sometimes when you have. So I guess this is where I'm speaking to a little bit earlier, is having good boundaries for yourself, because working in a global company, there's someone working almost always, because there's different time zones and people are working. So you might get emails and some emails asking questions, but you don't necessarily need to reply to them until you're working. And some people have actually added things to their little signature saying, like, you may receive this email outside of your working hours. Please don't feel obligated to respond to it until you're in your working hours, because it's a global company and it's going to happen. Sometimes I wake up with lots of emails, and it's really hard for me personally not to get in and respond to them sometimes. But it's having your own personal boundaries. And then, so that was work-life culture. And then what was the second question?
Remote work, whether or not
remote work. Yes, that is also a great question. So essentially, again, with the idea that it's a global company, and you might have some meetings that are in kind of funky times. Either if you're in Denmark, a lot of times you might have some evening meetings. In the US, you might have early morning meetings. So a lot of it is essentially, you just have to get your work done. If you have stuff that you can do from home, it is totally fine to do remote work. If you need to be in the lab to do it, then you need to be in the lab to do it. But the schedule is flexible, as well as, where you are can be flexible, provided you're getting the work that needs to be done. And so with job rotation opportunities, being in a global company, you have opportunities to not only work in different sites, but also in different departments. And I'll speak a little bit to that later. But there are always opportunities that you can apply for, which is really enriching. We had a meeting this morning, actually, where they're trying to increase the amount of people that do job rotations up to 25%, whether it's just being involved in a different department or physically going somewhere else. I mentioned it's a very diverse work culture and content expertise. There's interesting meeting times, as I mentioned, and someone is always working somewhere. So that's where you need to have good boundaries. And some of the things that can be challenging with this is you're working with different cultures, and you have to understand how one culture might be different than your own, and being cognizant of that, and you know, understanding that the way you might approach something that might be normal for you might be not normal for someone else, or it might be sometimes it might be an offense to somebody else if you approach it in some way, or you're very blunt, and some areas are just blunt as their culture. So it's a balancing act, and it's understanding the different work sites that you're working with to create a good, enriching environment. And so things can move and change very, very quickly. And we're always thinking of kind of the killer experiment. As I mentioned before, we want to design an experiment that will adequately test the hypothesis. If it works, that's fantastic. We continue to move with it. And if it does not, and we're confident that the experiment and address the question, and we can test to make sure that whatever we're using had good efficacy, and it hit the biology that we want, then that may end there. It might get shelved if there's not technology to target it. And so always in the idea of how can we either move this forward, or do we need to stop this because it's not going to work, at least right now. Nothing is ever like completely dead, because new technology can happen and stuff can reopen, or new literature comes out, and then we might reopen a project. But that's always the idea of either it's going to move forward or it's going to stop. Projects may close for various reasons. There might be a lack of efficacy, like I said. All of a sudden, it could be off strategy if the strategy changes. There could be a reprioritization of resources to something that's more high priority. And then sometimes there's just not commercial potential. Sometimes you might have a good biology that could work really well, but the amount of money that would cost to make the tool that would target that biology might be so much that it would be too expensive for a population to use. And also in the sense that, for me personally, with working with obesity, our risk tolerance I'll make sure I say this right. We are, with an obesity drug, it needs to be very, 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 very low risk, because you can live with that chronic disease for a very, very long time. It's not like we're just trying to improve the quality of life for someone who may not live for much longer. So the tolerance for high risk is extremely low. And other things that can change is departments can get occasionally reorganized. Sometimes this can just be shuffling of people or upper management, and it's just kind of like, okay, whatever, nothing really happens. Sometimes it can be pretty disruptive in that maybe you get a new manager, maybe you get put into a new department, and sometimes it can be, completely disruptive and extremely challenging, like a site closure or reorganization of a US footprint, which is something that I have experienced so far in my tenure. And so a timeline of things that happened in my 2 years that I've been here, I kind of joke with my manager about this a little bit, and I'll talk about that in a second. So I started in January, and a few weeks later, there was a department reorganization. And as I mentioned, sometimes those can be pretty relatively inert, where nothing really happens. And sometimes they can create very big ripples. This one created a lot of ripples. Nothing really happened to my department. I didn't have a new manager, but there was people who were shifted around, and it was pretty disruptive for them. For about a year-ish, nothing really happened. I was progressing in my job. Things were going very, very well. The company is doing very well. So everything was fine and dandy. And then early March of this year, we got a Seattle site closure announcement. And so this is with being completely honest and blunt, this was extremely challenging and very, very stressful. In the sense that we showed up, there was a lot of people there who are not normally at our site, and they announced that they'd be closing the site, and that's because they wanted to reorganize and reprioritize their footprint in Boston. And what happened with that is our jobs in and of themselves would end at the end of August, and then we would get 4 months of severance from there. So like I would have a job all the way to January, or at least pay all the way to January. But my job in and of the function that it was at in Seattle would be ending at the end of August. With that, they announced that they're starting a new site in Boston. They're trying to grow very, very large, and so there would be internal positions that would be posted, but we would have to apply for those positions. And so internal interviews started after that. And, you know, for some folks that was clear, some it wasn't. It took much longer for some. There was a Boston site at the end of April for folks who were considering going to go see the site and see if they wanted to accept an offer. And then an offer was extended. Yeah, and in that offer, initially when it happened, there was, for me, it was, you know, I had the option to either go to Denmark or go to Boston. And for me, for my family, it was just a better option for us to potentially consider Boston. But that was after months of discussion and a lot of stressful moments, and ultimately ended up being a good opportunity for me. And I personally, you know, ended up in a very good situation from this, but that didn't happen for everybody. You know, it was about 25% of people who decided to move, because my wife and I were lucky that we're in a position that we can move. Some people weren't, some people didn't want to. And pretty much everyone who at this point mostly has a job either with Novo or with another company. But there's no ifs, ands, or buts. This was incredibly stressful and very, very hard. And a portion of what I negotiated was, you know, they wanted me to move to Denmark, but it wasn't a good fit for us. So I did a job rotation in Denmark to kind of do some of the things that they wanted me to do. And that was a great experience. After everything that was really, really hard, and it's still really hard because we're setting up a new site. I'm actually in Boston right now, and we're building up a new lab, which is going to be very exciting. But we'll be in a temporary space for a year or two, and then we'll move into a permanent space. So it's going to be a lot of shuffling and a lot of, you know, being creative in how we can get stuff done. And then in 2024, I'll relocate to Boston sometime between March or April. And so that is kind of a timeline of major things that can happen even within a few years. And so I've kind of experienced a lot of some of the kind of challenges of industry. And key learnings from that is, you know, even during record success, which Novo's experienced now, things can change. And you know, it can end up in a beneficial way, but of course it's not going to for everybody. And you know, I was lucky in that, like, or actually everyone was there to support each other and be there for each other, and of helping people, you know, get a job either within Novo or outside of Novo, from like my manager, my manager's manager, those kinds of things. It was a very supportive environment, at least from as supportive as it can be. In that setting, everything is an interview, you know, and that's how the case for many things. You know, it's any interaction could be considered some sort of a soft interview, and some things are just out of your control, and you're just along for the roller coaster ride. And things like this are extremely hard. There's no, like I said, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's hard, and people recognize that even in leadership. But at least in terms of the difficulty there, it was laid out in a way that they weren't at least just dropping people like hot potatoes. And you know, with that, you know, some of the key takeaways in retrospection from my time is industry can move really fast when hiring. You know, there's many opportunities even within R&D that can fit your needs, and then you can also transition out of research. There's definitely opportunities where people have transitioned into research operations and other areas. Working in a global company can be fantastic, but it also has challenges, and things can just change. You know, it can happen on a dime, and you have no control over it sometimes. And then just my personal retrospection is, you know, I have experienced a lot of the difficult side of industry in my first 2 years. And would I do it again? Absolutely. For me, you know, it is a good working environment for me. I enjoy things that move fast paced. I want to work on something as long as I think it's going to be beneficial. And if it's not, then I would rather work on something that I think could be a beneficial therapeutic for a potential disease. And you know, the diverse experience, the opportunities are things that I really enjoy, and it has a good work balance and culture. and most importantly, it works well for me. It's an environment that I really like. I really like my coworkers and things like that. So it's really about what you want, because there's going to be challenges no matter where you go, and there are going to be hardships. You just have to make sure that they're worth it for you. And with that, I would like to thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks so much, Harrison. We do have a couple questions in the chat. So
Okay.
one of them is, you had mentioned in your initial interview that you gave a presentation. So what was your process for preparing for that presentation that you gave?
Yeah, so my hiring manager gave me a quick synopsis of what he was looking for. And we've been hiring positions for this new site, and he's done the same, where it's give a brief background on yourself, your research, why you might want to work for Novo, and some of your technical expertise. So it's just kind of very loose. Tell us about yourself for a period of time and your background. So it'll probably be hopefully tailored, and hopefully the hiring manager will tell you what they're looking for in that.
What was the time frame for that?
That one was, because the interview process moved very quickly, that one was about a week. But some people have gotten, less. But my manager also provided, what's the word, communication that it doesn't need to be like a very over the top presentation. We just want to learn more about you and your skill set. But of course, you take that with a grain of salt, because if you want to put your best foot forward, then you probably want to put more time into it than what they're saying.
Thank you. There's another question in the chat that says, in academia, when we face some challenges in the research, we usually have time to readapt the conditions and sometimes even shift focus of the research. Can you talk about your experience when facing this kind of situation in industry where the goals are predetermined and the timeline much shorter?
Yeah, so the timeline may, I guess there's very situationally dependent ways to answer this. And I guess one way, when we approach something and there's challenges, open communication is always really important. So like if you're trying to answer a question or test something and things aren't working, communicating that with the people necessary is the most important piece, so they know, and it doesn't get to like a critical meeting time and they're like, where's this data? And you're like, oh, it hasn't been working. Well, then it's much better for them to know earlier. Because things can be shifted around, and things happen whereby we want to use our time wisely and close things if they're not successful, but we also want to be sure that we're closing something for a good reason, and that we're not missing something. So it's not that we do one experiment, we're like, yeah, we didn't see anything. Maybe sometimes that happens, but if there's good grounds for a target, like we do genetics background, if there's good literature evidence, and there's multiple things, and we will make sure that we test the necessary components to make sure that we're not seeing something because maybe because the biology is not working in our hands, or maybe the methodology is not working. And so it's not that we have to move so fast that we might lose something. It's that you want to move fast, but still have a good quality of data to make a good decision. And sometimes where like things are moving fast, like if things progress a certain amount, once it gets to a certain point, we have this things like 500 days, where it's like try to get to the next step within 500 days, which is a lot of times kind of unrealistic. But it's the idea of what are the key things that we need to do, and do we really need to do like extra tests, or are those just nice to have? Will they really tell us whether this is something we should push forward or not? So it's just being very aware of what you're doing and how important it is.
Hi, Harrison. My name's Lena Cater. I'm a PhD candidate here. And for a while, I've known that I wanted to go out of academia into industry. But I worry that when I'm applying for these positions, you had mentioned that you had like shown your technical skills as a way of like being part of the interview, like telling them what you have as experience. But I feel like when I talk about those things, they're very niche and specific to like bench work. What things did you touch upon for like technical skills that you you have that were like translational to what the company wants and needs?
Yeah, that's a good question. For me, it was I had not only some kind of niche technical skills like the bioenergetics, because that's also extremely niche. But that can be applied in multiple ways. That can be applied as like tox studies to make sure that a potential candidate's not toxic to the mitochondria. That can be targeted as like a energy expenditure component. So there's a lot of different ways you can think of it. So maybe it's trying to think of diverse ways you can utilize your techniques. But also it very much can play a role in, if it's a position where you're trying to provide expertise or intellectual expertise on different projects, if you have a niche expertise, then you can be very, very valuable for a company. But it can be, maybe it may take a little bit more time to find a right fit. But then you might be extremely valued in that fit. And then the other things is just, utilizing and speaking to maybe challenges, maybe troubleshooting you've had to do before, that can really show that you are able to be a strong independent thinker and you can navigate things as needed when things don't necessarily go correctly. So I don't know if that really answers your question, and I'd be more than happy to talk to you more about it. But that's at least some of the ways that I use kind of a niche thing to my advantage and just tried to diversify how that niche technology could be used.
Thank you. We have two more and they're related, so I'll just pose them sort of as one. And perhaps you don't know, but what do you know about being an immigrant in terms of possibilities in industry? Are they more limited? Do most companies sponsor H-1B visas? Do you have any advice or knowledge on that?
Yes, they will sponsor visas. I had to get a visa to go to Denmark for my rotation, and some folks actually relocated permanently to Denmark. Sometimes it depends on the position level. Sometimes they won't do it for some like lower tier positions, but absolutely, if they want you, then they will work to incorporate you and provide what's necessary to bring you on board.
Awesome. Thank you so much. If everyone can join me in thanking Harrison for his presentation and his time, and we'll transition. Thanks, Harrison. So good to see you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you so much, everyone. And again, feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about anything. I'm happy to chat. So I hope you all have a good rest of your day. And I should stop sharing, I guess.
All right.